Since the last time I was here, I have been really focusing my first term in Congress on jobs in the economy, and in particular, whatever I can be doing to help New Hampshire businesses with their economic environment to grow, particularly with exports. We did an event with the Import-Export Bank, Export-Import Bank here with 50 companies. I've had a real focus on reaching out to companies and visiting. We call it Congress at Your Company, and I've gone out to about 40 at this point, a number of them here in Keene, where I've had, actually we were just at Smith Medical this morning, where I've had a chance to get a tour, take a look, meet with their management, and then also do kind of an open forum Q&A, town hall style with constituents. And it's turned out to be great because I get a sense of the business environment, how people are responding to the coming out of the recession. We can talk about particular issues to them. One of them was over at the, oh no, I'm blanking on the name, the B-Bomb, the Badger, thank you very much, Badger Bomb, talking about their employee-centered focus and some of the programs that they'd put into place. And then the combination of that with education and workforce training. So one of my very first trips out here to Keene actually was to the Entrepreneur Center at the university, at Keene State, and meeting with the folks there, talking about workforce development and particularly manufacturing. I've been very focused on this Make It in America agenda of trying to actually use our tax code and other incentives to encourage businesses to grow jobs here in the United States and preferably here in New Hampshire, and to change the incentives that currently favor exporting jobs and tax incentives that actually favor us losing jobs. I want to turn that around and encourage tax incentives to create jobs here at home. And one of the very first bills that I introduced was focused on workforce development. This is the issue that keeps coming up over and over. When I talk to these companies and I say, what is it that the government, the federal government, can do to help you or to get out of the way? And sometimes it's very specific. At Smith Medical, I'm working with them on the repeal of the medical device tax. But often what comes up is when they do have jobs, they are showing growth, they can't find the people with the skill set that they need for the 21st century jobs. And often that is in manufacturing, in the precision manufacturing, CNC with the computerized manufacturing. And so this program at Keene is really incredible. It's one of the best in the state and probably in the country in terms of bringing together the college, the community college, the K-12 and the SAU, and helping to train people and give them the skills. So that's been the number one priority. And I serve on the Small Business Committee. The number two priority has been serving on the Veterans Affairs, and really that's been a tremendous honor to work with the veterans here in state. My father was a World War II veteran. He was a POW shot down in the war in World War II. My father-in-law was a World War II veteran, and just working with the families and the returning vets coming home from Iraq and Afghanistan, and then of course the Vietnam era and the Korean era, and the trauma that they are dealing with, PTSD, traumatic brain injury, depression, plus physical ailments and injuries, and trying to get a handle on how we can deliver high-quality health care in a more efficient way, grapple with homelessness, and job training and helping people with the transition to successful lives. And what happened with that committee is that our committee was the group that discovered the problems in Phoenix, the wait lists and the delays. And so we had already been working on reforms, but we ended up ramping that up in June and July and passed into law. Sometimes it's a crisis that brings this about, but passed into law a really historic reform of health care delivery to our veterans. And it actually comes out of a pilot project that was started here in New Hampshire, where because our New Hampshire veterans often have to travel a long way to get care, either to White River Junction or Manchester, but then they're often sent to Boston. If they're coming from Colebrook, this is a real burden on them. So I had been working with the Secretary Shinseki on a pilot project for providing care in the private sector and having that care reimbursed by the VA. Make it more accessible, more convenient. And we had a contract with Concord Hospital, the Manchester VA and Concord Hospital, for surgeries and the types of care that they weren't able to provide. And it was going very, very well. And so now that is going to be expanded all across the country. And it's one of the few bipartisan success stories of this last Congress. It's been very dysfunctional, but I had the opportunity to participate. And then finally, the third committee is the Agriculture Committee. And again, had the opportunity to participate in the Farm Bill, which was, I'm the first person in 70 years from New Hampshire to serve on the Agriculture Committee, and from New Hampshire. And, gives you a sense of how far our agriculture policies shifted to the Midwest and the big corporate agriculture. But it was really terrific to be able to work with the organics and small farms and family farms. That was another one of the Keene visits, going to your farmer's market and then going to the co-op, and just really trying to help funnel, get programs more oriented toward the kind of communities that we have here in New Hampshire, so that people have access to healthy food and that our farmers have access to markets. And then the big win in that was an issue that came up about the Food and Drug Administration was looking to impose new regulations about, it's called FSMA, Food Safety Modernization Act. And these were going to be very, very burdensome on New Hampshire farmers. And so my staff and I worked with the FDA for them to come to New Hampshire last August, and we held a hearing. 200 New Hampshire farmers showed up, talked about overburdensome government regulation, how this wouldn't work for them on their small farms, how this might put them out of business. And lo and behold, we were successful in rolling back that original version of the rules, and the FDA recently issued a much more small farm friendly version of these rules that took into account the concerns that were raised by New Hampshire farmers. So this is all by way of saying Congress is still very, very dysfunctional, and what I have tried to do is be a part of the solution, look for bipartisan opportunities. I think I was very fortunate to be in a position that the Veterans Affairs Committee and the Agriculture Committee are two of the last bipartisan committees in the Congress, and to be at the right place in the right time for two major reforms, the Farm Bill, the 5-year Farm Bill, and the VA reform, which are two of the biggest bills that this Congress has produced. And then I'll just close with one of the things that I've tried to accomplish is to be a part of changing the institution in a way that it will work and function better for the American people. I'm a part of a group called United Solutions that brings together Republicans and Democrats to find common ground. And so we've had some success with that, and hopefully, if and when I'm reelected, that I'll have the opportunity to continue to work on that. So I'll stop there. There are other issues about seniors and education and women and all kinds of things that are happening in the election. But in terms of what I've been working on, that'll give you a good start.
So let's start with we'll start with the grander scale and work our way in.
Sure.
Foreign policy issues. Obviously, the threat of ISIS has resonated in New Hampshire, particularly.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how we are dealing with that, what we ought to be doing, and whether the same rules or concepts apply there in that instance that we would use elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say, having been to the second Jim Foley memorial, this is a really heinous group and barbaric, obviously, and I think a real shock to civilized people all over the world. This is one area of major disagreement, and there are many, but there's a clear contrast in this race with my opponent. Her view of this is to talk about boots on the ground, talk about American troops going into Iraq or Syria. And I feel very strongly, taking my role as representative very seriously, that that's not the direction that I think the people in this district want to go. And part of that is my experience with working with veterans and working with the troops, having been to the deployment ceremonies and understanding the burden that these two wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, have been on our Garden Reserve and just generally on our society, on our economy with the debt and the deficit. So my approach to this has been, the first war in Iraq, I believe, was a mistake. I don't think we should have gone, and we found out after the fact that there weren't weapons of mass destruction, and I think it, we spent, $1 trillion, and at the end of the day, what we are suffering from right now is the consequence of having put a whole lot of faith into a group of people that it turns out in hindsight didn't deserve it. Now, once we were there, then how do you deal with the situation of leaving? And I believe part of the problem was that we left behind probably $1 trillion worth of equipment, planes, trucks, munitions, all of this. It was a conundrum. It would have been too expensive to ship it home, but by leaving it behind, it is one of a range of reasons that ISIL has been able to adapt so quickly, particularly add to that $1 million a day in oil revenue and the money that they get from taking hostages from European countries, not from the U.S., but the ransoms. My disappointment right now is in the quality of information, the intelligence gathering, and I've certainly attended the confidential and classified briefings, but I'll be honest with you, I don't learn very much there that I don't already read about in the newspaper, and that I feel, and whether this is in DOD or in the State Department or in the CIA, I don't know, I'm not assessing where the blame lies, but I feel as though we generally, the American people and Congress, were sort of caught by surprise at the speed of this advance. And I did vote for the airstrikes that we voted on in September, right before we came back, primarily to give Secretary of State Kerry and the President time to bring our allies to bear to take the fight to ISIS. And by that I mean our Arab allies in the region as well as the Western allies. I don't believe that America should go it alone. I don't believe that we should be sending tens of thousands of troops in. I think there are standing armies in the region, most notably Turkey, but also Saudi Arabia, and that what we should be doing is working with our allies, and whether it's providing air cover or training off-site. So, for example, the training in Saudi Arabia bases. But I just, and this goes back to September of 2013 was when the president first came to Congress asking for support for military intervention in Syria for the chemical weapons. And again, as I say, I take the role of representative very seriously, and we had extensive contact. On a typical week, I'm getting 1,000 contacts a week, so email, letters, phone calls. It's the most engaged, it's one of the most highly educated districts in the country, and I would venture to say it's one of the most engaged districts in the country. And we're responding, that's on a whole range of issues, but we're constantly responding and having communication about the views of our constituents. And by the way, no distinction of Republican, Democrat, or anything like that, just whoever needs help or whoever wants to give us their opinion, we want to know it. During that period, September 2013, there was a short period of time where I was getting 1,000 a day. I did a telephone town hall that we do from time to time to, engage people on particular issues. We had 5,000 people on the telephone for a half an hour talking about the issue of chemical weapons in Syria. And the public sentiment was running 100-1 in opposition to American troops going into Syria. And so what I think we should do is, as this discussion continues about what our role should be, I think Congress should definitely be consulted, because I think it's the best way for the American people to speak. But it's my impression that the American people do not want us to send tens of thousands of troops and boots on the ground back into the region.
So what do we do when Turkey and Saudi Arabia and all of our allies in the region say, we're not going in there, we're not going to fight them hand to hand, we're not going to engage with them? The Americans will eventually cave and do it.
Yeah, I don't expect that that's going to happen this time, and that's why it's funny, because my opponent has this position. We had our first debate last night, and she said, well, you shouldn't telegraph that what you're not willing to do. And to me, because of that reason, I think we should telegraph what we're not willing to do, so that it's very clear to the allies in the region that we're not going to come pick up that. And I've seen, just even in recent weeks since we took this vote, Turkey coming to the table, part of the challenge that Turkey had was they had 40 diplomats had been taken hostage. And so when we were having the discussion in September, Turkey wasn't in the discussion at all, and it was very frustrating. But now, as you see the troops advancing, ISIL advancing on Kobani, you're starting to see Turkey, first of all, their hostages were released, and so I think they're in a better position. Part of the challenge, though, I'll be the first to admit, is it's extremely complex because there's the whole issue of the Kurds, the whole issue of Syria and Assad, at one point, Turkey, yes, they're willing to go in, but it turns out they're willing to go in because not to take the fight to ISIL, but to take the fight to Assad in Syria. So I don't think there's, to answer your question, there's no simple solution anywhere in any of this. But certainly there are European countries that have not only an interest, perhaps even a greater interest than ours. Hundreds of people from Great Britain are in ISIL. Now, maybe dozens of Americans are, and obviously to protect our homeland, we want to stay on top of the situation. But I don't think it's too much to ask for, our allies, our Arab allies in the region, and the Western allies to come to the table and be a part of the solution.
When in your mind does this go on long enough that it should no longer be the President consulting with Congress, but Congress saying, well, this is actually a war that we've got going on here and we need a declaration?
And I don't have a particular date in mind, December 13th or whatever, to answer your question. I think it's a question of whether, they have, whether they can maneuver. Do they have the resources that they need? Are they able to, we've taken this first vote and it was very limited. 90 days gave them a limited mission and a limited role. I would expect that we would have a discussion and I think that took us to December, so I think it probably would be December when we would re-engage over November and December after the election, re-engage that discussion. And frankly, I'd be ready to go back today if that's what they need. I don't think that the generals feel they need to come to us. And frankly, I mean, just based upon my impression of what people think in New Hampshire, I think they'd have a lot of work to do with the American people to get to a place where a declaration of war would be successful. I don't expect, if you asked right now, it would be successful in Congress.
Yeah, it's just an interesting question of how long bombing and war making goes on
without calling it
war.
Yeah, but we've been here before, where it's gone on for a very long time without a declaration of war. So, I mean, I would expect that that discussion would happen and we'd have a vote on that. And for me, the most important question is that the American people have the chance to speak at this point, because, I personally believe that the debt and the deficit are very important, but I also believe that a large part of the reason that they happened was the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I like to say I'm pro-veteran, anti-war. Because right now we have a situation where we have tens of thousands of veterans coming home from those wars, and people aren't willing to step up and take care of them. And we underestimate the cost of war, both in blood and money, blood and treasure.
Immigration, I wanted to give you a chance to defend or discuss your support for pathways to citizenship for people who came here as undocumented.
Yeah, thank you.
And then also just sort of how to address the crisis of all of these people coming over the border.
Right. So let me start with, I support the comprehensive immigration reform that was actually bipartisan, passed in the Senate, voted in favor by Senator Kelly Ayotte and Senator Jean Shaheen. And, you tend to, these aren't all perfect solutions, but when you get a vote that is as strong as that, Senator McCain, they forged a strong compromise. And part of that compromise is secure the borders, and I absolutely believe we need to do that, and do that first, whatever it takes. But part of that is, how do we, as a nation of laws, deal with 11 million people living in our society who are illegal. You know, it's not fair to anyone. It's not fair to them or to us. And so I do believe in a pathway to citizenship. Now, that has certain elements to it, paying whatever back fines, paying whatever back taxes, going to the end of the line, as they say. You know, I want it to be fair vis-a-vis legal immigrants that are coming from countries where we have a legal path. But I just view our society as being stronger when we uphold the laws. And frankly, all those people being engaged in our society, in our economy, paying taxes. Right now, there's a huge impact on an underground economy because people aren't normalized with Social Security numbers and paying taxes and, you know, living. The whole question, I go back to that presidential debate where they all tripped up on the question of should illegal immigrants have driver's licenses? Well, it's a conundrum, but the reality is for the rest of us, it's a problem to have lots of people driving around without driver's licenses, you know? So there's a reason that we are a nation of laws, and I think we need to get back to that. Now, in terms of your comment, all those people coming over the border, I'm not sure if you mean the issue last summer about the children. Yeah, so the issue about the children, to me, first of all, I'm fascinated that it reached a crescendo in June and July, and then really dropped way off. And one of the stories that I heard, and I haven't confirmed this, but it interested me, was that the coyotes, the illegal transporters, had made this big push down in the Central American countries to say that there was some critical deadline of July 1st that these children would come to America and get this normalized status. And there was, you know, apparently signs up and about, and the word had gone out about this July 1st date, and that you could get a date for a hearing. Well, come to find out, the date for the hearing is the deportation. They were saying, you know, there's a particular document that you're going to get as though that was. So my view is, let's go back to the source, first of all. Let's explain to people, you know, we didn't have any, that I'm aware of, any program that, whether it's USAID or the State Department or somebody in these countries, putting out the word that this is not true, that this is a treacherous journey for your children, and do what we can through development and diplomacy to alleviate that pressure for people to want to send 7-year-olds across the desert, or teenagers that, you know, were going to be raped and abused. So I think that's the main thing, and my impression is that that has worked, and that we don't have a flood of, that issue came up last night in the debates, and my opponent started going on about these children. There are apparently 24 children living with relatives or in foster care or here in New Hampshire going to New Hampshire school. And she was talking about Ebola coming across the border and enterovirus and all these things. And I said, well, look, yeah, we should make sure the children are vaccinated and that they're not sick and a threat to our schools, but we're compassionate people. These are children. They left their country not through their own free will. They're not even old enough to have their own free will. They're trying to reunite with families.